And this is the Town of Estes Park Board Study Session, now in session. And our first speaker will be Human Resources Manager Lazat about the Human Resources Strategic Plan. You're up, Emily.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Trustees.
We have the microphone adjusted for Jackie a second ago.
We need it readjusted for me.
There is a little shift there.
I try. Thank you so much for having me here this afternoon. Today, I'd like to go over 3 things pertaining to HR: an overview of the services provided by HR, an overview of the Organizational Culture Survey and Action Plan, and a little bit more about our HR strategic plan, the work that we've done, and also the work that's upcoming. As you see here, this is the Human Resources Mission Statement. We have this. We are working to provide this mission statement in support of the town board's mission, vision, and goals, and to support all of our employees here, and then also to help in our recruitment efforts. Some of the services we provide are listed here: comp, benefits, employee relations and conflict mitigation, training and development, recruitment and selection, and retention efforts. In HR, we have a total of 3 staff members. Jackie Williamson, who's the HR director and also town clerk. Me, I'm the HR manager. And Becky Weller, she's our HR technician. So we have 3 FTE to support this mission and that of the town. We support about 170 full-time regular employees, and we bring on approximately 20 seasonal employees each year. We also manage benefits for an additional, I would estimate, about 40 employees who work at entities within the Estes Valley. So we manage benefits for Town of Estes Park, also Visit Estes Park, Estes Valley Library, Estes Park Housing Authority, and Estes Park Sanitation. So in total, we have approximately 250 covered lives that we manage benefits for. And as we go through the next slides talking about the org culture action plan and survey and also the HR strategic plan, those are also things that we're doing in addition to supporting employees on a day-to-day basis. So the org culture survey, a little bit of that background. So the survey was first launched in February of 2020. We've sent it out electronically to employees every other year since then. So in 2020, 2022, 2024, and we're anticipate sending it again in 2026. That survey is sent by Graves Consulting, which is our HR and compensation consultant. And Graves Consultant sends the survey, collects the data, and analyzes it. It's completely anonymous. No one in the town, not town administrator Mahalik, nor HR Director Williamson, nor myself, none of us see the granular detail. Graves Consulting compiles all of that for us. It is a mix of rating questions and open response questions. So I'll give you an example here. This question is an example of a survey question that's one of the rating questions. So in tiny print, we see strongly disagree, disagree, no opinion, agree, and strongly agree are the 4 categories that employees have. And then open-ended questions are things such as, the thing I like most working for the town is blank. And employees get to tell us all sorts of different information there. So there's a wealth of information that comes out. High level here, our highest scoring question: I find my workplace enjoyable and my work rewarding. That is wonderful that that's what our employees feel and want to tell us about the town. Our lowest scoring question was about ethics and fairness. The town does a good job of avoiding internal politics, favoritism, and favoritism and infighting. It is important to note that one of the limitations of this survey is that we don't know, since it's anonymous, if we have the same group of people who are reporting in 2020, 2022, or 2024, or if that group is changing over time and it's a different group of individuals who are giving us information. So that is a limitation to this survey.
Can I just ask a real quick question right there? So I'm assuming that you also don't know what division that's coming from, whether it's the library or the town hall specifically, or the sanitation.
So let me clarify one piece there, Trustee
Okay.
Youngland. We only manage benefits for the 4 entities. We do not provide any other HR services for them. So it's only benefits for the sanitation district, Visit Estes Park, the library, and the housing authority. We don't provide HR services. We don't do payroll. Those services don't fall under our umbrella. So the survey itself, those results, though, to answer your point, they are anonymous. It's only town employees, but since it's anonymous, and that has come up, and we'll talk about that, we don't know, for example, in this question, if everyone who's saying agree is here at town hall, or if they're working for Power and Communications. We don't know that. So it is a balance as we move forward. One of the things we're going to look at is if we want to perhaps sacrifice a tiny bit of anonymity, that's a tough word to say in public, for a little bit more granular detail so we can know where some of these results are coming from and how we might better develop action plans.
And I think generally when, in order to do that, you have to have a certain number of responses from a department to feel anonymous. Yeah.
Correct.
You couldn't do it in a department of 3.
Exactly. So in HR with a department of 3, it would be fairly not anonymous to see what those results look like.
And one other question, and I'm sure this is more a question for Graves, like in the past. I'm sure they've used these questions with other entities, and it'd be interesting to see how the scoring of those entities matched for the same questions. So, and maybe that doesn't, but I would assume that certain things like fairness or all those things might be universal to different places.
Sure. I don't have that granular level
Right, of course not.
information, but from what Graves has said, she sees common themes come up, that ethics and fairness for other surveys she's done for municipalities, that she sees that theme come up, or that she sees growth and development, that's something that municipalities tend to do well. So big picture, she can give us that. If that's something you'd like more information on, I'm happy to
I
dive
think it would
into
be
that
helpful
with her.
because I do think there's certain things that are universal for organizations.
Coming down. And that's true. And what Emily is stating is exactly what Graves has told us. So compensation. Compensation is always one of those topics. No matter what an organization does with compensation, you're always going to hear from employees that it could be better, right? It doesn't matter what organization you work for. They could be the worst paying or the best paying, and you're going to hear that compensation is an issue. I will say one of the things I found fascinating after the last couple of these that we did with Graves is that she tends to tell us that our organization is running well. She doesn't tend to see as high of scores in a lot of these areas that we see, which I think helps us understand that we are above average in how we're operating, and I think that's just important to let the board know as well.
Does the open-ended question on this question, because this is pretty specific internal politics, favoritism, infighting. Does that open-ended question, is that an option in this, and does it give you, okay, so that's.
So not in this particular question, Trustee Geigel. There's open-ended questions at the end, kind of what do I like most and least about working for the town, and what's something that I'd like the town board to know.
Yeah, I think it would be valuable to whittle this down a little bit because it is 42 to 30 and then no opinion. Is that just, I don't want to get in a jam if it's really not anonymous? Or, I mean, I'm thinking from taking a survey, how would you answer if you weren't happy?
Sure. I would hope that if folks were truly unhappy, it would be in that negative, strongly disagree or
Yeah,
disagree.
yeah.
What we were finding when we first did the survey with 5 options, essentially, was folks tend to go to the middle.
Sure.
And we're not sure if that's a positive or negative
Yeah.
opinion. So we changed that to no opinion, meaning they don't have an opinion or they're unwilling to tell us for that.
And there is, if this is a really big deal to someone, there is a process to address specific issues for a specific employee without the fear of retribution or any consequences for voicing their concerns?
This, since it is completely anonymous, we don't ever see who says what. So we,
Separately, if there was a concern that rose to the level of, I disagree about ethics and fairness, I believe there is, but I'd like the record to show that there is or is not a way for someone who's not happy to follow that up through human resources without the fear of losing their job or being acted upon to raise a concern, that leadership can be aware of it.
absolutely, employees are always welcome to come talk to human resources if something was not captured in
Okay, I
this
wanna
survey.
support that idea.
Or even
It's
in
very
the
important.
results that Graves provides us, if we missed something.
Yeah.
When we provide that information to all staff, there's an open invitation if something wasn't captured in the aggregate data to please come let us know.
Excellent. Okay, thanks. Good answer.
I do want to also point, I do not like that we group these together because in my mind, ethics and fairness are very different. Fairness is very perception driven. Ethics can be too, but fairness is very individual, something that's very minor, like very minor elements can be, yeah, that's not really fair. Like, why do they get the fact that we allow 2 remote days for people that work in the office? And if you're a line worker or a police officer, you can't work remotely yet. Not fair in a lot of people's opinion. There's a lot of unfairness that happens. Ethics is totally different. And that last question that, Emily, you want to scroll back, just to be very clear, lowest score, not an ethics question, that is a fairness question. Do we avoid internal politics, favoritism, and infighting? Not good. We would like to see that score higher, but I do want to clarify that that's a fairness question and not an ethics question. We take the ethical side of things very seriously. We have numerous ways to approach ethical issues and systems to deal with those reports when they come in.
Yeah, and we also have policies that back that up, that require, if people feel that they are having an issue, that they can come to HR, there's no retaliation allowed. Those sort of things are all in our policies to prevent that kind of behavior, and if we see it, we address it. So I wanted to make sure that you understood that we definitely deal with that in our office.
I've got a couple of questions. So you've been doing this with Graves for 20, 22, and 24, and we'll do it again in 26, presumably. What's the history of the response rate? What percentage of people are filling it out?
I love all the questions. When we first did the survey in 2020, we had a 91% response rate.
Wow.
Which is pretty incredible for when you survey and poll people. We had a 73% response rate in this survey, and I believe in 2022 it was about that 73% as well. So I think that alone shows that our employees are engaged and willing to provide information to us.
Okay, one other thing, I heard that hospitals are required to have a whistleblower hotline. I didn't know that, and I just heard that recently from a hospital trustee. I presume we do not have to have that and do not have that? No? Okay,
We do not have that.
okay, thank you.
We're not, while not legally compelled to have one, we do have a anonymous suggestion box, which is what we call it, basically our pressure release valve. If someone does not feel comfortable bringing something to the town board, HR, Deputy Town Administrator Dan Weber, myself, or Attorney Kramer, they can put it in the suggestion box. It creates a record. It's anonymous. It's through SurveyMonkey. And we let all new employees that come in know that that's a resource. Down the road, there are services that offer hotlines. They're typically more geared towards fraud, waste, and abuse, and we've been talking about those post-ERP implementation. But right now we have the really the kind of informal Survey Monkey suggestion box.
And then I think this next slide was getting at some of those trends over time that you all were asking about. Communication has a slight downward trend from 2022, but it is higher than 2020. So we're still kind of right in that range. Highest category remained growth and development, and that's the highest yet that we've seen. And the lowest category remained ethic and fairness, but again, that increased over the 2022 score. As Jackie said, there are a lot of things that our employees were saying that we're doing well and that they like about working for the town. There's always areas that we can improve upon, and this survey is one tool to help us gather information. It is certainly not a perfect tool to gather that type of information.
I would guess that, like on communication, 3.4, 3.44, and 3.42 is not statistically different. I mean, I don't know if they did any stats on it, but there's probably just randomness in that, on who replies
The
and
bottom
who doesn't.
two look like they,
That
if you
could
go
be-
back to
that could be
look like
significant,
there might be
But the other one, I don't,
statistical
are these even
proof
worth
of
talking about,
improvement.
those differences?
Right, and again, we don't know if it's which people it is. Same people, different people, how they moved. And then this was the executive survey that Graves provided us. As you can see, great overall participation. No categories below 3, which is wonderful. And in general, employees like working for the town, like working with others. And most apparent recurring themes, as Jackie talked about, cost of living and wages, leadership needs to be fair across organization, and overall folks enjoy who they work with. As Graves conveyed to us, one of the most important things that came out in the survey is that employees want us to take the survey and show action on these items, to develop an action plan and take steps to meet that. So we'll talk here in the next few slides about some of that we've been doing. So highlights from the 2022 Org Culture Action Plan. Let me back up. February of 2020, all of our employees took the survey, and then by March of 2020, none of us could be within 6 feet of each other. So we had some other priorities in 2020 and 2021, so we did not develop an official action plan. We did after the 2022 survey, and some of those action plan items are here. One of them was that we initiated a supervisor manager training, which was first offered last year in 2024. That included about 10 hours of training through 4 modules, ranging from supervisory skills to hiring and recruiting, emotional intelligence for supervisors. Also included very specific things to the town, like how do you fill out specific forms? How do you move people through different step systems? Overall, we had about 30 managers attend, so that was one very tangible action item that came from the survey, was more training for managers and supervisors. Some other pieces we did here had to do with telework. We also revised our performance appraisal process, which we now call employee success and development. So that whole process, we took a revamp and are trying a different method to make sure that folks can have communication about performance. Transportation assistance did not rise to the top as something that we needed to continue to prioritize. We are continuing to prioritize conversations about organizational-wide guiding principles. And then we launched the Org Culture Survey in 2024, as we said we would and was anticipated. So in 2024, this slide with lots of words is basically saying that we tried to engage our team members in lots of different ways once we had the 2024 survey results. Graves presented those to all employees who were invited to 2 different sessions. We then took that information to the engagement committee, who generated their ideas on what actions we might take. We then took that to the supervisors and managers to the leadership team. We held a joint meeting with the engagement committee and leadership team, and we finalized an action plan that went back out for all employees to provide their feedback on, and now that's what we're working on for our org culture action plan. Some key items for this action plan that we're working on is that there's many action items focused on communication, making sure that employees are receiving messages in a way that's understandable, that we have multiple channels of conveying information, and that a lot of times we're doing good work, but maybe we're not sharing it in a way that staff are hearing. So how can we do that? The executive leadership team is the responsible party for many of the action items, and that shows true leadership at the top, that organizational culture is going to filter down to our staff what they see in our leaders and how our leaders behave. We're continuing to look at and strengthen positive responses about work-life balance. And as you all mentioned, we're considering revisions to the survey tool itself. Are there different ways to ask questions, or do we need to go more granular to get better information so we can have more actionable items? And then we are anticipating relaunching the survey in 2026 to again gather data over time and show that longevity. As you'll see with org culture and strategic plan, lots of things tie together, and part of the town board strategic plan was developing that action plan and implementing it, so we're actively working on that. Okay, any further questions about the org culture action plan or survey? We're going to transition now to the HR strategic plan. We have lots of moving pieces in HR, and it's wonderful when they synchronize together.
I did want to make a comment that I'm so very glad you do the survey. We've noted that I think our friends up on the hill at the hospital haven't done one for 6 or 7 years, and there's a lot of public comment and concern about the fact. So I'm very happy that you do it every 2 years. Great thing.
Thank you. We hope to continue it. Okay, the HR strategic plan, it was developed in 2019 in coordination with town department and again with Graves Consulting. It was implemented in 2020, and then we review it annually, doing a current year and then look out 1 to 2 years. Today, we're just going to review 2024, kind of where we were and what we're anticipating upcoming for 2025. We do have action items that we know are going to be 2026 action items as well. We try to make our plan manageable and achievable, knowing staff capacity and knowing that we're dealing with people in HR. So sometimes things come up that take our immediate attention, and then how do we also work on these strategic objectives? We have 5 different focus areas here, so we'll go through each of them. First, though, our top 3 strategic objectives in 2025 are to select and begin implementation of a new Human Resources Information System, HRIS, a benefits analysis benchmarking, and convert current employee files to electronic, and identify and utilize an employee file structure. Each of these are heavy lifts that will require time and focused attention. So HRIS, we'll use that term. I consider that kind of the brains of the organization as far as people. It houses, Paylocity is our current system. It houses who people are, their demographic information, how much they make for pay, what position they have. It also houses benefit information. And our current HRIS system we've had since 2013, and it seems we have outlived kind of its useful life, or it's outlived its useful lifespan to us. We're ready to enhance efficiencies and have greater effectiveness, and we think we can do that through implementing a new HRIS system. For our benefits analysis, this is that we want to be sure that our benefit package is competitive and a tool to help recruit new staff to our team. And also, we hope something that will help our staff stay here and remain here for a long time. So we've compiled data, now we're working to do that analysis. We want to have data to support any budget requests that may be coming your way in the next budget package, and also any proposed changes that HR is suggesting. We want to be sure we have that data about our benefits. From HR's perspective, when we onboard new folks, I love talking about benefits. That's a huge positive thing for our team, and telling new employees about all of the benefits that they're eligible for now. And then our third strategic objective is converting current employee files to electronic. So again, this sounds simple, but it's scanning all of those and then putting them in a file structure. If you think of a file cabinet, where do we house each file? How is it named? How can we retrieve it when we need that information? Who has permissions to see what? And also that sustainability. We're hoping to decrease the amount of paper we have flowing through our office and house things electronically. And as we've noticed with some emergencies, it would be wonderful if we weren't worried about our paper files and we had them housed in a way that we could easily retrieve them if needed. So those are our top 3 strategic objectives, and you'll see these come up as we go through each focus area. So for training and development, we talked about the Employee Success and Development Process, ESD process. That was first implemented in 2024. We tried it, we got a whole bunch of feedback. We did it again in 2025, making some of the changes that we heard from staff. Employee Success and Development is performance appraisals. And then we implemented the supervisor and manager training. So upcoming for this year, we're going to do the supervisor and manager training again for new supervisors and managers, or if things have changed, processes have changed. We're looking to work with the SMART team, which is our interdepartmental safety team, to select a reasonable suspicion training for managers. Looking through our policies, we realize that's a training that we need to be providing. And we're working to develop a framework for succession planning. So as folks may have planned departures from the town, how do we ensure that those skill gaps are filled?
Succession planning is a really good thing. What does reasonable suspicion mean? Did I miss that?
Reasonable suspicion training is so that managers have the tools if they believe that an employee may be under the influence of drugs or alcohol,
Oh, okay.
so that they can effectively get that person tested and we can provide supports. Recruiting, selection, and onboarding. The updates in italics, I guess I decided not to italicize things, so don't be looking for that. It's just the updates here. Continue to explore and develop a process for employee onboarding. So that was one of the topics at the manager and supervisor training, that we talked about how we welcome new staff and how each manager can help us to do that. And further process enhancements may depend on what HRIS system is selected. Often HRIS systems have the full package for onboarding. So we'll see what we can do there as far as continuing to welcome folks to our team. And then upcoming for this year is we'd like to have a conversation with the leadership team about credit equivalencies and job descriptions. We think that developing a way to look systematically and consistently at education and experience can help broaden our pools and help us recruit diverse talent to our teams. We kind of learned that maybe perhaps the combination of any equivalent experience might be too broad. Naming a specific degree might be too narrow. Is there a path in the middle that might help us to reach our strategic objectives and have very well qualified staff? So is it a combination of education and experience, and what does that look like? So that's what I mean by credit equivalency, of how do we identify that talent and the need in our organization. Engagement, retention, engagement, and communication. We developed our org culture action plan. So we've talked about that. And we're updating our exit interview process and clarifying how that data may be used. So HR does perform exit interviews with all departing employees. We also, since the last org culture survey, any separating employee has the opportunity to have the exit interview with HR or with Employers Council, who's our third party HR They're HR consultant and vendor, so employees can choose to talk with me or they can talk with employers council. We wanted to do that to make sure employees feel comfortable in sharing whatever they wanted to and had a reasonable method to do that.
What percentage of leaving employees take advantage of a exit interview? Is it still pretty small?
No, I would say almost everyone.
Really?
It is
That's good.
rare that I don't have someone take advantage of an exit interview. I don't have a ton of folks who talk to employers council and not HR. That has been a small number, but the vast majority of employees are willing to do an exit interview. And then we also would like to provide the leadership team high-level exit survey data. So those turnover numbers and kind of that idea of are people being pulled in other directions or was there a push factor out of the organization? So employees share all sorts of information and we hope that we can learn from that too. And I tell departing staff this, we want to get better. The information you give us helps us to develop systems and policies and practices to support staff. Then comp and benefits, this is always at the forefront of our minds. We gather data for a comprehensive benchmark study of employee benefits, and we're looking to analyze that data. And then a wellness program has been tabled until 2026 with those 3 other big strategic planning items that I mentioned. We were not certain we had the capacity to also delve into a full-fledged wellness program, and we think that each of those deserves focused attention. So we moved that item to 2026 to allow for better staff capacity. And then for 2025, we're going to analyze the benchmarking data and make some budget recommendations, so you may see that forthcoming. And then our last focus area, infrastructure. This is where a couple of our priorities are lying. Current employee files are boxed and ready to be scanned. They're actually with our professional scanning company, so we box them and they will be scanning them. And then we'll be developing that file structure so we can find the information again once we get it back. We're currently accepting proposals for a new HRIS system that we'll be looking to move towards. And then we're exploring outsourcing project of employee handbook as potential budget request for 2026. The priorities there, we've talked about that those are those infrastructure that I think can enhance our efficiency throughout the organization and provide a better user experience for staff through our HRIS system and potentially be able to retrieve their records sooner. So HR, there's never a dull day. We get to work with people and offer a range of services and support to our colleagues and our community. The org culture survey can provide some data points, but it's not the only data point. It's a tool that we use. And then we've identified many upcoming opportunities in our strategic plan for 2025 and then looking forward to 2026. And we anticipate and I hope that I can come back and give you further updates on a more routine basis to the town board so that we can all have that understanding of org culture and also strategic plan as we go. I'd be happy to answer any questions if anyone has them.
I think we're good. Thanks for the report. Thanks for doing exit interviews and employee surveys and acting on those. I think the opportunity also for employees to come privately for specific items and to have a couple different options of how they do that. It's set up well, so thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. It's my pleasure to do this job, and thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
We have a scheduled break for dinner. Do we want to just make it a clean break for a little bit so everybody can mill around and grab their stuff rather than a working?
It's entirely up to you. We did up to you all. We did put a break in there. We're running a little bit behind, but if you guys wanted to grab some food and then we could start again, we'd be happy to do that as well. So
Well,
up to you, Mayor.
Yeah, we've got a little extra time built in a couple places. So we'll go ahead and suspend the session, IT back there. if you want to turn it off, and we'll come back in 10.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mayor.
We are back on, and the study session continues. We have the process for classifying vacation home and accommodations business licenses, Town Clerk Williamson and Attorney Kramer.
So Mayor, if I could just take a moment, I should have done it while Emily was still here, but I really do want to just thank her again for all of her hard work. She's been a true asset to the town and to our office, and as a representative of HR. And she, like that whole training that she said we did here for the managers, she did it from start to finish, and it was pretty amazing. So I wanted to throw her some kudos publicly and with you all as well, because she's been doing a fantastic job, and we're really proud of her. So with that, I also want to note that I apologize in advance that you did not have any advanced memo or presentation on this. As you may or may not be aware, we're running at 50% staffing in our office, but we still have 150% of work to do. So I do apologize if this feels a little, coming out of left field for you all. It is a discussion item more than anything else. So if we could go ahead, there we go. I think the title for me is a little probably deceiving for you all, like we're going to go over a process and how we're going to do this. It's really more of a discussion about how can we develop a process, because we are finding ourselves recently and over the last couple years having to address the difference between a vacation home and accommodation businesses for a number of reasons, which we'll get into. And we're really looking at having that discussion with you all and maybe codifying something that helps us really, not just us, but the public, staff, and so forth, understand how we're defining a vacation home license path and a accommodations business path. And I'm really going to look at Attorney Kramer here in between slides to see if he has anything else he wants to add before we move forward. Are you good? Okay. So what I really want to go over with you today is kind of set the ground a little bit with going over those definitions that we currently have in our municipal code. We want to kind of go over, do an overview of what the current conditions are, as well as review some classification factors with you all, and then have a discussion with you at the end to see how we might move forward. So again, just to kind of lay the groundwork, and we're all working off the same premise here, these are the definitions that are currently in our municipal code. A vacation home means a residential dwelling unit that is rented for less than 30 days. I won't read the entire definition there, but just to kind of get an idea of what we're talking about. Accommodation site is one parcel where it has 2 or more accommodation units, and it's all owned and managed by the same person or entity. And then, of course, the definition of what a unit is there. So I just want to make sure you all have a chance to just review that quickly. Okay. We good? Okay. So current conditions, as you may or may not be aware, and I just want to make sure again, that we're all playing from the same sheet of music. I know the mayor will like that terminology. The development code, as it has been written, allows as a use by right in accommodation zoned districts a single family home to be built, and then multifamily dwelling units to be built. And we have a number of these in our community where they've taken accommodations property, they've built a number of units, and then by state law, they were allowed to condominiumize those properties. And over time, some of these properties have then sold those units individually, and now they have individual ownership. I think that's just an important key element as we move forward with this discussion. The developments that we have in town as well have different conditions of approval that were placed upon them as they went through Planning Commission and or came through Town Board for final approval. So we're also trying to address those, and some of them are kind of unknown because we've had staff turnover in planning. It's not always understood that they have certain conditions on these developments, and that's become a key element for us to look at. Are there any special conditions that might prevent a property from operating a certain way or not? And we'll go over some examples here in a bit. What we've also been experiencing quite often is properties are starting to change the model in which they operated. So they were built, they were all the units were built, they were operated as more of a maybe hotel motel, but still condominiumized, but still operating with a centralized reception and management. But then over time, they've been moving away from that. They've individually sold properties or sold units to individual owners. Perhaps they have decided to not require that you use the centralized zoning and that you can independently manage a short-term rental and use a property management of your choice, or even have the property owner themselves manage it. So we're just starting to see so many different variables as these properties are coming forward and they're asking us questions. It's really good that Bunny's here because she might also be able to answer some of the questions that we might have as we move forward, because she takes a lot of these phone calls where people are asking us questions, and without a lot of these details being brought forward, sometimes it's getting misinterpreted as to how they're operating or where they fit into the scenario of licensing. Another key issue that we have is trying again to discern those similarities and those differences between how these properties are operating. And more specifically, you know, are they operating like a vacation home or an accommodation? Should they have a life safety inspection? Because they've moved away from some of these key elements, such as having centralized reception, having somebody there if there's an issue that they can go to and get immediate resolution, versus having that property operate independently and not having somebody that they can go to. That's kind of been one of the key elements behind life safety inspections, is ensuring that these properties that are being operated as vacation homes are operating in a safe manner, and that when people come to the property to use the property, there's signage, there's smoke detectors, all of those safety concerns that we might have related to a property. And then, you know, with that life safety inspection, they're getting a certificate of occupancy that says they're able to operate as a vacation home, which has been a key element as well in kind of discerning how they're operating. Anything else that you'd like to add, Attorney Kramer?
Not especially, but I'll just highlight that point about the life safety inspection too. Hotels don't have to have life safety inspections. It's a policy of the board that vacation homes do, because people are there on their own and they have to figure out how to get out of the home if there's an emergency. So as any property over time becomes less like a hotel and more like a vacation home, we're trying to figure out what is that cutoff point. Okay, at this point, we're going to consider you a vacation home and you need to get a life safety inspection, among other things. So that can happen in a change over time. It can also happen if something new comes on the market or something new is developed that is sort of like a hotel in some ways and sort of like a vacation home in others. So we have to figure out how to classify that. And this whole presentation, in my mind, is really about systematizing that a little bit better so that the clerk's office has more guidance on how to do that.
Any other questions before we move on? Okay. So these are just some examples. I really don't want to call out any individual properties. So these are just some things that we've seen. These are all accommodation zone properties, as you can tell from the very first bullet. They all have individual ownership at these properties. But then we start seeing the differences. So property X also has on-site management. But the development approval does not allow long-term occupancy. So no, they can never, even the owner of that property cannot live there long-term. And that wasn't part of the approval of the development. So it is truly was built for short-term rental, for accommodation use and nothing further, even though they're individually owned units. It's kind of, in my mind, like a timeshare, but you own the unit all year round. But it is strictly for accommodations. Now, it's not to say that the property owner can't vacation there and utilize the property, but they cannot live there long-term. Property Y, again, has all those similarities, but has no on-site management. They're allowed to manage the property themselves. They're allowed to hire a third-party management company or, again, manage it by the property owner if they meet the qualifications that are currently, regulations that are currently in the code. They are allowed to occupy the unit full-time or rent it long-term. So, again, a difference there. Property Z, again, has the similarities, but they have the on-site management that is required to be used in order to short-term rent. You can't use a third party. You can't manage it yourself. It's part of the requirements when you purchase that property. And they're not allowed to rent it long-term, but can occupy it full-time as the owner and only as the owner. So they either live in it full-time or they're allowed to rent it short-term through a management company. So just right there, there's 3 examples that seem similar on the face, but they're very different in the way in which they're allowed to operate or how they operate. So that's kind of gives you a little bit of a picture of what we're looking at in our office when we're taking phone calls or trying to discern how a property might fit into a vacation home versus an accommodations license.
Do either of you know how the assessor's handling these ones that were hotels and then start evolving into vacation rentals and from a tax standpoint? And at some point, do they convert to residential tax rates and not commercial tax rates, or how are they handling it?
I don't know the answer to that.
It's a great question. I know that the assessor's offices are always trying to catch up on exactly what's happening in a short-term rental situation, but I don't have the answer to that question.
What determines whether they can be occupied short or long-term? And it would be really helpful to know, just if you could think of the top of your head, what these properties might be in town. Because putting these, I can think of properties in town, but is there a really good reason we're not saying, well, like, you know, the Holiday Inn? Or, I mean, can we use examples that will allow us to have a better understanding of this? There's a lot of little pieces, little details here that make it difficult to figure out what you're talking about. And I want to understand you clearly.
Sure, these are all accommodation zone properties that have condominiumized units on the properties.
That used to be hotels. No?
Some of them operated as hotels. For example, the one that's really prevalent out there is Mary's Lake Lodge. And that's a good example to use because the lodge burned down, right? So that really changed the way in which they operated. But those initially were all owned and then sold off individually, but then managed and were required to be managed by the on-site management company, and the lodge itself. But then once the lodge went away, then they brought on a third-party management company, which they were required to use as well, until such time that the HOA decided that was no longer the way in which they wanted to operate, and they opened it up so that people could just do whatever they wanted with their units. So things have just
Long-term,
evolved.
short-term.
Yeah, they've just evolved over time.
And because it's zoned accommodations, they can do whatever they want.
Right,
with
so
that property.
initially they had an accommodations business license.
Gotcha.
Over time, as they have been individually operated, owned, managed, they've come into the vacation home realm because they are properties that can be purchased and lived in long-term by workforce housing if they can purchase that unit and they want to live there. And some people do live there long-term. I don't know the percentage if you were to ask me how many are short-term and long-term rented. I don't know that. But they have a number of ways in which they can operate now, where before they kind of strictly operated in one manner.
So the zoning won't change. There'll still be accommodations, but are we trying to regulate them as vacation homes? Is that the objective?
That's what we're trying to discern. That's what we're coming forward today to say we are finding that we have a lot of variation here, and how should we determine whether or not it's a vacation home versus an accommodations property. And so we have some factors we'd like to go over that hopefully will
I'll
help you
keep
maybe
listening.
understand what we're looking at. And it's not an exhaustive list, but we certainly have some ideas of items that we would look at.
Feel free to use real-life examples. If there's no legal implication, we all live in the community and know these properties. They are either are or aren't something, and that would make it much easier to understand the conversation
Sure.
for me.
I think it's actually a really good segue of a question. And some of the background on this type of slide is that town clerk's office put together a spreadsheet for our internal consideration of the different aspects of a whole bunch of different properties around town. And it was like, are they accommodation zoned? And just all of the kinds of elements you see up here. And every time we tried to pinpoint a specific factor like that and say that's what's going to determine whether it's a vacation home or an accommodations use, something like accommodation zoning, we thought, okay, that would solve the question of this particular development, and that makes sense to us. Then we realized that there were 2 or 3 other developments where that just confused the issue. So every time we tried to isolate one particular determining factor, we realized that we were missing a part of it. Zoning was just one of them. So what you're about to see from Jackie is our attempt to figure out a way to take all of those factors into consideration, try to be consistent with what's been done over time, but realize it's going to be really hard to figure out unless we want to work through it, which we can. But our feeling was it's going to be really hard to work out exactly the formula for determining in advance whether something is going to be a vacation home or an accommodations use. So I think that'll become more concrete on the next slide.
And we attempted to address this a while back, and maybe this is a good segue into that comment of the IAU as well. We tried to address this at one point. We thought we had our arms around it, and we worked with, at the time, this was before Attorney Kramer was here, with Attorney White on a definition for an individual accommodation unit. And we just have struggled trying to figure out what properties fall under that category and what properties don't. And so we're looking to move away from that definition and try to determine how we either classify them as a vacation home or classify them as a short-term or a accommodation unit. So it's just, we don't have any properties that are currently licensed as an IAU. We just have not been successful at identifying them. Kind of as Attorney Kramer said, there was all these factors that we thought we got it, and then we didn't. So that's why we're coming to you today, just to kind of review some of those items. So I'll just go into the next slide. These are some of the factors. Again, I don't think it necessarily is an exhaustive list, but it's some of the kind of key essential items that we look at as we are trying to discern how to classify a property. So again, we look at that zoning. Is it residential or non-residential? Whether that unit has been granted an occupancy under one of the 2 building codes, either the residential code or the international building code, because that depends on how it was built, determines how it was built. Whether that unit has been used for household living in the past, and whether or not it's actually classified, or qualifies, I should say, as a dwelling unit. Again, these definitions are in our development code, and whether that unit is part of several units in the same development, or is it under common management with a centralized on-site kind customer service available? Can you go down to the desk and ask for another set of towels? That sort of a thing, right? Like you can when you're in a hotel, you forgot your toothbrush, you walk down and you can get a toothbrush, right? So it's kind of looking at that, and whether other units are similarly situated in the same development and have the same use in that development. Those are some of the key factors that we've been looking at right now. And again, it's not an exhaustive list, but it's how we've begun to try to parse out how these properties should be classified. Do you have anything else you want to add? Any questions on any of those? Okay. So really, that's what we have to present, and we'd really like to just open it up for dialogue with the board, comments, questions.
Can you say a little bit, okay, you classify them, what's the difference between the classifications as far as how we treat them or what they do or what regulations they have to follow?
As you all know, a vacation home has a different fee structure as accommodation. So accommodations fee structure is based on the number of units. And again, it kind of gets back to that key definition too, right? That we're also looking at. But if you have a hotel that has, I think it's 1 to 5, and Bunny, I'm going to look at Bunny because she'll probably know better than I. 1 to 5, I think it's $50. 6 to 19, I think it's $100 or $75. And then above that, it's the next tier, which I think is $100.
So to clarify for accommodations, it's 5 units or less is 50, 6 to 20 is 100, 21 units or more 150 for the annual business license.
Whereas a vacation home, so we're talking about 1 unit, right? 1 dwelling unit. It's $200, the base fee, $50 per bedroom. And then that regulatory workforce housing regulatory linkage fee that is also applied to a vacation home.
And also the life safety inspection, of course, if somehow there was a question over something in a residential zone, then potentially the wait list, the
True.
full process for applying for a vacation home, the compliance inspection associated with that, the kind of certificate of occupancy they get, what we look for when we do those building inspections, all of that in addition to the fee structure. We do have some vacation homes that are that are not required to pay the vacation home regulatory linkage fee. They're exempt from that because they're in a zone where you're actually not allowed to have household living. So we created that exemption when we instituted the fee. That's the CO zone. So it's not 100% one-to-one that if you're a vacation home, you pay that fee. We have found reason not to require that in the past.
So, to me, when I look at this, it seems like the big distinction is whether you have effectively an office there that serves the residents when they're there. I don't know that ownership matters particularly. It seems like could be commonly owned or owned by individuals, but the distinction that I think makes most sense to me is that if you have an on-site manager that's available at least in reasonable hours, that shouldn't be a vacation home. If there is no on-site manager, then I think it could be a vacation home, simply because the main distinction between a hotel and a vacation home to me is the services that are available on site, which, with a lot of hotels may include, a restaurant, may include other things like that. Of course, some of them may have a pool, even if they're a vacation home, but I don't see any meaningful distinction to make other than that as the distinguishing factor.
Back to the taxes. Not 100% sure, but I think when you do kind of minimize that those taxes do go from commercial to residential. But I would say that would be a good place to look at. If they're paying residential rates, then they're a vacation home. If they're paying commercial rate, they're a commercial hotel type entity. So I think that might be a really good, solid thing to look at, is based on their tax structure, and based on that is how they get classified. That would be my suggestion.
What is the potential impact of units? What do you think? How many units do you think this will affect?
I think it has the potential of affecting up to 150 to 200 units.
And if those were all reclassified as vacation rentals, there would be all of those fees that were involved for 150 units. So this has the potential of being a little cash cow. So I have to balance that with, what's the objective? What's the high level objective here? Life safety is the only thing that stood out so far as, well, that would be beneficial, but not at this expense. So heard just a little bit of that. So I would like to know more about what caused this conversation.
It's, you all received an email recently from a property, and that is not a singular conversation that the clerk's office has had. We've had these conversations kind of repeatedly by property owners or developments on how they should be classified, and we've tried to be fair and equal in how we're treating them. And I think that's another key element that I want to make sure that we are looking at these similarly, and how they're similarly situated, and making sure that if one is being classified as a vacation home, the similar property should also be classified as a vacation home. So it's not, from my perspective, of course, we don't operate with the financials in mind. We're looking at how do we apply the regulations and the licensing across the board in a fair and equitable way, and making sure that we are managing that effectively. So that, to me, is one of the other key elements, Trustee Eigel, that our office is trying to accomplish. But that email has brought it that we feel we need to make sure that we're bringing this forward to the board, and that you understand the conditions and the issues that we are looking at and trying to resolve in order to be fair and equal in our treatment of each of these properties.
Okay. Do you think it's fair to say that people who own property that's accommodation zoned have the opportunity to run rental properties, and they don't have to worry about the cap on rental homes, fees, things like that, the regulation that we have in place for everyone else that has a rental home? Because accommodations, you don't have to deal with that.
And I would push that back onto the board, because it's not for me to say if it's fair or not. The board made that decision that they wanted.
No, is that an accurate description of the current circumstances?
Oh, that's a different question.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
How it comes out of my mouth.
I want to make sure I'm not putting my personal bias on whether or not something's fair or not. We're just really trying to make sure we're.
Is it accurate to say would be a better way to pose that question? Okay.
So the board made that decision when they adopted these regulations, that they really wanted to push these into those commercial zoning districts and limit those that are in the residential. So it seems to be, now that we have reached that cap for a while, that the board is seeing that impact, and that's what the board wanted to see. And when we get phone calls from people who are like, I'm looking to buy a vacation home, we say, well, there's not a cap on those that are commercially zoned, so you might want to focus your attention to some properties maybe that are in those zoning districts.
Would we take that away then with this reclassification? Would we be taking away that opportunity?
No, I don't believe we would, because that's what the intent of the board was when we adopted these, I think, when the board adopted these regulations initially, especially with the cap.
Trustee Eigel, just to clarify, in terms of the linkage fee, that does apply within accommodation zones, and that was a policy decision of the board back when that fee was being implemented.
So, back to the building codes. So, if someone remodels or puts an addition, this would have an impact on that, because if they're an accommodation, they'd have to build to the commercial building code, and if they're a vacation home, they could build to the residential code. Is that correct?
I don't think so, Trustee Lancaster. If they're licensed as theoretically, you could be licensed as a vacation home and have gotten your original certificate of occupancy under the International Building Code. So it's not necessarily aligned that way, but most of the time, yes, I think that's true. So so imagine, and we've been talking about things that feel a lot like hotels or feel a lot like vacation homes, but imagine cabins too. Something that feels more single family, may have gotten a building permit and a CO under the IB or under the IRC even. And then what does it take in order for them to be an accommodations use? Is it simply a matter of stationing someone there as a centralized reception, or is there something more to it? So I'd say that one of the factors, as we've been conceptualizing it, could be what building code they were approved under and how this
Initially,
might affect
well, I
that.
was thinking, what happens if they remodel or do something? How do they know what code they have to follow? Is it all based on whatever it happened to be 30 years ago? And if now they're more of an accommodation, they'd still be allowed to do bathrooms and kitchens under the residential standards and not commercial standards? Or
I
would they
think-
have to be upgraded to follow commercial standards?
I think that remains a pure building code consideration. So however the building division addresses that, it would
I
remain
guess that's
that
what I'm
way.
asking. How are they going to
Yeah.
address that? We don't know.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Fair answer.
So I guess my question is kind of towards Cindy a little bit. Do you know for sure, or did everybody confirm here that when a place is condominializing, they become commercial? They become commercial taxes. We know that for sure.
I as
Residential.
Become residential.
Oh, residential. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, they become residential.
as Trustee Youngland was saying that, because as you all know, I have a little bit of a time up in community development, which I feel like makes me a little dangerous, because I know some things and I don't know other things, and I know things have changed. But as she was saying that, I'm like, I believe that to be correct, but I think we need to double check that and make sure that that's correct. But as she was saying, and I started to kind of nod my head as a memory that I was having, is that's the tax benefit. So these larger developments were built, they immediately condominiumized them because they realized that tax benefit. And I believe that is the reason behind it, but I do want to make sure that we double check that before we run off and say for sure that that's what's happening with these properties after they're condominiumized.
Okay, because I found that interesting. That's my question. Yeah. And then how does that affect? Now I've got myself so confused in my head. I'm just trying to say condominialized. Thank you. Yeah, it's condoed. I may be off now because I threw this the wrong direction in my head. But how would it affect like this safety inspections and stuff? I mean, the ones that are now have been condoed and are using them. Are they not getting the safety inspections that other vacation rentals are?
So we throw that question to community development. As we get an application in our office, they're reviewing that and determining whether or not a property needs a life safety inspection. And I believe some of that does go back to how they were originally built. And so that would be a question we'd have to verify, a little more information for you with community development, as that's their responsibility to tell us whether or not something needs a life safety inspection.
I've got two things. I want to follow up on Trustee Youngland's point about the commercial versus residential property tax classification. This is an area that I think is likely to change over time. There's always been discussion at the state legislature as to whether, these are commercial uses that should be commercial property tax or not, and how do you do that? And the assessors struggle with that as well. And I would be reluctant to base our categorization on something totally out of our control, which is whether or not the legislature changes that or whether the assessor happens to, treat something as either residential or commercial. I would say, however, that, one of the complaints that always exists about vacation rentals is they don't get commercial property. They don't have to pay commercial property tax. And that is one differentiating factor that is often used to justify some of the things we do with vacation rentals, which, be that as it may, it's a determination that's not under our purview. But I would say this, that if it is classified as commercial for property taxes, I don't think we should treat it as a vacation home regardless. Yeah, so that I wouldn't necessarily make that the distinguishing factor, but rather a thing that would take it out of being a vacation home altogether.
So just to clarify, these review classification factors, I said they're not the end-all be-all, that this list could grow. That could be one of those items we'd add. And I'd also want to note, because I don't believe I said it, that you wouldn't have to check all the boxes. It would be, we're reviewing it, we're saying it it looks like it's got 4 out of 5 of these, and what's really pushing it over the edge maybe is that taxing issue, but that could be added as another factor that we review and look at in making a determination.
And I would prefer to have a bright line, not a lot of factors, because that calls into question judgment as to how you apply them. And it seems to me it's going to be more controversial if we have another number of factors, and which is why I really think that the key item is a central reception office that's open reasonable hours and has an ability to be, have someone on call nearby when they're not open. And that makes, to me, that makes most sense. I wanted to follow up on one other thing. So I understand the county requires inspections, life safety inspections on vacation homes every other year. And we only require it when you get your certificate of occupancy, right? I presume we have representations that if they're going to make changes, they'll come back to us or something like that. Or maybe that's just a matter of the development code that they have to do. But, it's troubling to me that the only life safety inspection occurs, whether it be a hotel or a vacation rental, when you first apply for the license. And yet changes occur all the time. And I'm just wondering whether we might want to look at some sort of periodic life safety follow-up inspections, but I wouldn't limit it to vacation homes. I'm sure the lodging interests wouldn't want the intrusiveness of that, but
Sure.
But it just seems like that is an ongoing question that we have with any sort of accommodation as to, does it remain safe? Is it safe? Has it remained safe? And I don't know. With the fees we charge, we'd have to probably add fees for that.
Sure. So the board made the decision when they adopted the life safety that they only wanted the one and done. So the only other time we really get in a unit at this point in time is if it transfers. Those properties that are transferable, we do a code enforcement inspection, and if the code enforcement officer sees something that might be questionable, they can reach out to our.
Do they do that with hotels as well? Or?
So that would be more of the fire district. They are
would
regulating
only-
the
but they would
commercial
only-
properties, and I believe, I of course don't want to speak for them, but I do believe that they are on some kind of a
If a transfer
schedule where
occurs.
they
there's a
inspect
schedule.
those hotels and business properties downtown.
I think it would be helpful for us to learn more about the differences in regulation on both of them to understand, because ultimately we need to make a policy decision as to what should be a vacation home and what shouldn't be. And all of those things factor into our thinking, I think. So.
Yeah, and I think if the board decided they wanted to go back and look at the life safety inspection requirements, it's certainly up to you all. You could add additional every other year inspections, and of course there would be a fee that would be charged. There's a $200 fee right now for that life
Yeah,
safety
I'm
inspection.
not necessarily advocating for it.
Sure.
I'm just thinking about it.
I just want to make sure
And
you
I
have
think
the
every other
information.
year is probably too much. But anyway, thank you.
Sure.
I can see we're having a problem because there's some hybrids out there we haven't had before. You mentioned about having like a front desk. I know a couple of the ones that I've worked with that have switched from a front desk to self check-ins. And there definitely are hotels. There's no question that they're a hotel or a motel. They have staff on site, but it's just housekeeping or engineering. It's nobody to help you with anything. And you do your own check-in, you do your own checkout. A lot of that came out of COVID, I think. So we're getting these things that are involved into things we're not used to seeing before. And those are ones that, where does it fit?
Yeah, we're seeing moving target, and we're trying to manage and determine. And again, we want to be as consistent as we can as we're applying these regulations and like these classification factors.
What else do you need from the board tonight on this?
I would say, Mayor, that there are two potential paths here. One is to move toward an ordinance that incorporates a number of factors the way we've envisioned it and presented it here. The other would be to try to pinpoint the formula or the determining factor for whether something is one or the other. That would take more conversation. And I expect we'd get into conversations like, well, if we made it this, what does that mean for this particular development? If we made it this, what does it mean for that particular development? Which we can absolutely do. I know we're happy to do that, but that would be the next step in that conversation.
I mean, I agree that having a lot of boxes that you can click is problematic, but it's also not problematic because there are so many different kinds out there. So I like this approach. I would be very interested to know of those that you're looking at exactly how they fall into the tax, because I think you'll see a very big pattern that they are residential and not accommodations. And so I would really like to see that as one of the options. I think that would be a very helpful tool for you, because it was, that's exactly why people were kind of minimizing. I know then at least the county got wind of, saw what was happening when this was going on and said, oh, wait a minute, now you can't be residential, but I don't know if they reversed their ruling on that. So I would be curious to see where that balance is, but I would like to see that added. I think it would be a helpful tool. But I think because there is so many and they will continue to morph into different things, just as our establishment has, you have to have more than one box. They aren't going to all, you just have to, unfortunately. So that would be my recommendation.
Would the next step be additional study session discussion? Taking this a little bit further down the road of definition?
It could be, Mayor. If the board did want to go toward factors, then, and I don't usually say this, it might be helpful for me to bring or draft together an ordinance that lines out exactly how it would work, and then we could take feedback on that.
We tend to work well with that because it gives us a target to shoot at, and then, we can suggest modifications or ask for modifications and do it iteratively and get it in that direction. That might be a first best approach.
Yeah, I just like to make sure it doesn't come back for an action item next, just because we have a drafted resolution.
No, I think it's too fledgling to go directly to that. Okay.
So, well, it sounds to me like what I'm hearing, Attorney Kramer, is that we would bring back a draft ordinance at a study session.
I agree. On the factors approach, and technically not an ordinance, a red line of current code that would describe where we might go, and then we can fiddle with it from there.
Yeah. Good.
Great, thank you.
Fiddling.
appreciate the feedback.
Okay, we can move on to our last formal topic on the study session, vacation home transferability. And same two parties. Although I noticed Town Attorney Kramer is listed first this time,
It's because it's more legal.
more legal. Are there gradations of legality, I guess?
As soon as it's any kind of legal, you're going to get Attorney Kramer. Did you put it in the packet? Am I missing it?
It's at the bottom.
Oh, I see it. Okay, Penny.
Thank you, Jackie. So continuing on the vacation home track, this is a very streamlined, hopefully, presentation because this is really more about conversation than it is about presenting information. It comes out of the town board's action a few years ago, making it so that moving forward, vacation home licenses in residential zones were not transferable. New licenses would not be transferable from that point on. The issue might jump out at you from the language as emphasized here, that those licenses past that date are not transferable to any person upon sale or other transfer of ownership of the property. Trustee Brown brought up this question a few months ago, and it was already very much on my mind. We just needed to figure out how to slot it for your review. So thank you for asking that question. But if it's not transferable to any person, then what happens when you pass away? Is it transferable as a bequest? Is it transferable even to a close family member? If you allow transfer to a close family member, then how close is close enough to be allowed for transferability? And what we'll get into is that there's a spectrum, and we need to figure out what exactly we want to allow along that spectrum. Because what we're starting to see is folks asking the question and folks actually coming forward licensing these vacation homes in the name not of an individual or a pair of individuals, but as a business association such as an LLC, which could allow down the line for the sale not of the home itself and not of the license itself, but of the limited liability company and everything that comes along with it, which we wouldn't necessarily know about. It might change the registered agent of the LLC, but that's not technically a transfer or a change of ownership the way we were thinking about it at the time. So the question really for the board today essentially is, what do we want to do about that? It's not just LLCs, there are other kinds of business associations, but we also have to think about trusts too, because it's not out of the question that someone could change the beneficiary of a trust based on other business dealings. So that could, similar to an LLC, allow the ability of someone else to functionally be in control of the vacation home and its revenues without the kind of transfer as originally envisioned. So what do we do about this? There are a number of possible ways that we could approach it, and it's just a matter of talking through what we want to do. One possibility is requiring that people who hold these licenses be natural persons, be actual human beings rather than companies. Another possibility, kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, is to do more or less what we do with liquor licenses, which is to say, if there's a change in ownership structure of the underlying corporation or LLC or whatever it is, then they have to go through a process much like a transfer, or in this case, they would not be allowed to transfer it. And the way that shakes out in practice is something like, if more than 10% of the ownership of that company changes, we consider that a transfer and that's not allowed. We don't have anything built into our code to do that yet. Obviously, that would increase the burden on staff to track down and make sure they're monitoring whether ownership stakes, equity stakes have changed. a process for people to report, as they do for liquor, when those stakes are changing, and making sure that all of that is true and correct. That doesn't solve anything for trusts. I think it would be, and I'm not a trust and estates lawyer by any stretch, but I think it would be challenging to figure out whether someone has changed the beneficiary of a trust, even more so than when we're talking about LLCs. As I mentioned earlier, we could keep it to natural persons, but allow transfer to specified relatives in specific situations, perhaps, such as when someone passes away. Of course, that raises a number of questions, one of them being how close to does the relationship have to be? We have policies for town employees for who qualifies for bereavement leave, for example, and it might end up looking something like that. Verifying relationships, if it's going to be something other than, say, a legal spouse, if it's going to be, say, a common law spouse, or if it's going to be someone who's a domestic partner or in a civil union, how do we verify any of that? So there are a number of issues that would raise. And then finally, another option would be restricting it to natural persons, but saying there could be 2 natural persons listed on the license, and if anything happens with that relationship, or if anything happens to one of them, then the other one could hold it, but not allow it to pass further than that. The question for the board really being between that one and the prior one, when we say these licenses are non-transferable, do we still want to allow an option for it to transfer from generation to generation ad infinitum? Is that something that we think is appropriate, or is that something that we want to limit because of the policy of the town board that these licenses are meant to recirculate back into, especially for residential zones, recirculate back into those cap numbers and allow for homes elsewhere in residential zones to become vacation homes? So that's really all I have. Depending on where the conversation goes, there may be transitional issues. Say there are a number of LLCs who hold these types of licenses now. If we decide that we don't want to allow LLCs to hold them in the future, for example, we need to figure out how to transition. That could be done at a renewal period, saying, okay, we're going to allow you to transfer it for the limited purpose of putting it into a natural person's name, and then that will be the licensee moving forward. But we're not, in that example, we wouldn't be allowing an LLC or perhaps a trust to renew for the next year. Or we delay it a year, but I have that as a placeholder for talking about transitional issues depending on where the board wants to go.
So just a question for you. Is there a way of putting it on every year's reapplication? If this is a trust, has there been any restructuring done? And just put it that way. And not allowing it if there's been reconstruction. Now, could there be somebody that lies? Absolutely. But if it's a legal form and they're lying on it, then we go back later and prove that they lied. It's not like taking staff time to go researching every single one of them. So I guess that would be my question about trusts and LLCs. I actually believe in trusts, so I don't think it's really fair to say you have to have your natural name on something when you don't want to have your name on something you have in a trust. But there should be something saying that if I have a trust, I'm not going to keep on giving it away because I can get around the regulations. So if I have to answer a question in the past year, has there been any reconstruction of the trust or whatever, however you ever want to word it, and I either have to lie or not lie to keep this license, I have to make the decision whether I'm a lie or not lie, and then go from there. So is that a possibility to do something like that?
Well, I'd let you answer that piece.
So the answer is yes. The answer is we could do that. Of course, as you noted, it would be challenging to monitor and enforce and ensure compliance. But yes, of course, we could do that.
If you lie, you lose your license. I mean, it's for some people, that's going to be a deterrent to lie. Oh. Mike's still
Hold on, she's still going. Will you give her the mic?
I just won't turn it off this time. So I guess what I'm saying is that everybody's going to lie. I mean, not everybody's going to lie, but we're always going to find some liars. But if we have on there that if any of these are untruthful, have you want to list it as an attorney, then you automatically lose your license. I do think that deters people from lying. There's always going to be some that don't, but it doesn't necessarily put on the burden of staff to look until somebody reports them or something like that, and then there's an investigation, and then they lose their license. So I mean, there are certain things you can do. People lie on driver's licenses or whatever. So I do think there's certain things we can ask and then say, you know, under burden of truth, you lose this license or whatever. So I think that's still a possibility without having to take out trust completely.
Sure, and we could put in there, you know, the consequences if it were determined that anything was untruthful, and we could also say that we reserve the right to require you to substantiate it by sending us whatever necessary documents. Yes, we could do that.
Okay, thank you.
One of the things, if I could just add to that, one of the things that I do want to try to stay away from is notarized documents, like affirming through a notary that this is, you know, because we have had other communities try that. At our clerks conference one year, they had a whole thing on vacation homes. Estes Park probably should have been part of that conversation because there was a lot of things missing. But one of the things I heard loud and clear is don't require notarization. It was really difficult and really impossible to manage that piece. In this particular community, a lot of people lived elsewhere, and so to get those notarizations and get them sent in was very difficult. So something more like what you were talking about, Mayor Pro Tem, what might be more palatable than, I just wanted to tell you all that I would personally like to steer away from notarization of any sort of documents. And also, we require them to fill out a document if there are changes like in management, or perhaps they have a new email, or maybe they've moved and they want us to mail things to a different location. That too is going to be a red flag for us. If we were to see somebody new, what do you mean there's a new person on this LLC? So that also could be used as a technique for us to send up a red flag, but it would be a little more staff work on that too.
I like the approach of having real natural persons on the license. I mean, I agree the trust can own the home, but the license needs to be under a person, not an LLC or a trust or whatever. As far as non-transferable, you know, I sat on the board when we made that decision, and I was quite clear in my head that non-transferable was non-transferable. We didn't talk about, you know, to your you know, your children or to your grandchildren or to whatever. We just said non-transferable, period. So I'm not quite sure, you know, why we're thinking differently.
No, that's right, Trustee Youngland,
So-
and I should have explained that better. More my concern is that because non-transferable is so clear and is so strict, it might push people into the LLC realm where they feel like they can transfer it more easily.
And totally, that makes sense. And I'm sure that is being done as you spoke, it has. I would require it to be a person, a natural person to be on there. And I think that was the main crux of what you needed feedback on. So that would be my stance.
So, you know, there's a lot of stuff out there about change of control in the sense of loans and contracts and things of that nature that could easily be applied in the context of a LLC or a trust. Because I think you're right that the key is that we need to have an individual on the license, no matter what. And if there's a change of control and someone else is controlling that, then there's been a significant change that is like a transfer. On the other hand, I'm also very sensitive to the fact that we have a lot of family properties out there that people have always wanted to keep in their family. And I think I don't see us wanting to prevent that. And it's a big issue in residential zones where there's a cap. So I would like to see some sort of concept of a family transfer being a permitted transfer. It doesn't mean that it's, and maybe a permitted transfer within the parameters of our limit on residential zone vacation homes. Because I don't think it matters that much in an accommodation zone, because you can freely transfer the license anyway. You can get a new license. So anyway, I guess I'm thinking twofold. One is threefold. An individual being on the license, one individual, and that we provide that a change of control would be a transfer, and look at the whole body of things about what might be a change of control, because change of ownership can be a change of control. A change of officers of an entity can be a change of control. Anything like that could factor in. So, and I really think we probably want to permit family transfers too. So one other thing, it's a little beyond the scope of this, but I do want to raise it as long as we're talking about it, and that is the transferability of pre-2021 licenses that remain in effect. I know that decision was made by a prior board. I might have voted for that at the time if I had been on the board, but the more I've thought about it, the more I think that that is not good public policy, insofar as I think it has had the effect of increasing values of properties with those transferability permission in residential zones at least. And it's had an impact, I think, of aggravating our housing crisis a little bit. So I don't know what the county ended up with, but there was some discussion about it's transferable for 10 years and then after that it's not transferable, which is the sort of thing that I think might be good. The problem is, can we legally do that when they right now have transferability rights too? So, are we taking something away that is a legally vested right in some way? And I'm not going to ask you to render an opinion here, but that's what people will say. And so that's something we would have to navigate if we went in that direction. But I just think from a public policy standpoint, in retrospect, and I'm not criticizing anyone on this because I know what it must have been like on getting transferability in the first place, but in retrospect, from a public policy standpoint, it seems to me like transferability presents some social problems in our real estate community that we should think about revising.
Kirby has not spoken, so I'm going to relinquish mine. You sure? Okay. So just a quickie about Bill's just comment. I agree with you. But one of the reasons we didn't were the people that were already transferring it, and it was hard to take that right away.
Well, I know, I get it.
Legally, whatever, whether it's legal or not is questionable, but that's why we kind of limited it, so. Right, and I think majority of people felt the same way you do. Actually, it surprised me that you feel that way, so that's good. The only thing I would have about not being, I don't necessarily agree with transferring it down to the family, because all of a sudden it's 10 generations down. It's the same problem as not having it. But I do think we have to look at, if we're not having it as a trust or not allowing any other trusts, which is fine if that's what we decide, is it allowed to have two people on it? I mean, a husband, wife, a father, son who own the house together. Do they have to have joint tenancy with right of survivorship? I mean, that's my legal term for the day. Is that the way they have to write it in there? Those are different factors we're going to have to look at, because there are people that are a couple or that aren't married even, or legally married, and they own the house together and they want to have the vacation rent. Is it right that when one dies, the other one has to throw everybody out and not be able to rent it? Those are the things we're going to have to look at if we don't have any transferable, But if they write on the license at the beginning, joint tenancy, then I see maybe we do that. So it's just another option for that. And then the other question I would have is if a house is in a trust name and the vacation rental is an individual name, does that affect insurance or lawsuit liability? I don't know, and that's just a question. You know, if somebody sues it as a vacation rental, are they not suing the trust? Are they suing the individual? I don't know.
So, right.
Right, which is not good if you're the individual. So that's just a question we have to look at if we're not allowing the trusts to own I'm saying.
On that one, Mayor Pro Tem, I agree. My assumption is that they'd sue everyone anyway. I don't know the answer on insurance, how insurance deals with that. On your prior point, we do have a number of vacation homes currently where there are two people on the license, if I'm understanding it correctly. So that's something we allow now. And that's why I included that up there of allowing two natural. I don't think we've ever had to make a rule about 3 natural persons, but 2 natural persons is something we do, especially for the transferable licenses.
If you want, go ahead.
But is that the ones that are already on the license itself, like named on the license? We're not talking about transferring it to a natural person that is not already on the license, correct?
I'm just talking about as it currently stands, there are a number of vacation homes that are licensed in 2 people's names.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So just real quick, I like the idea of the license having to be natural persons, whether it's 1, 2, or whatever. Particularly after Cindy mentioned, the house can be in a trust, but the license could be. And as far as liability or insurance, that's business decisions for them to deal with. I don't think that's our issue to deal with. I do like although being able to transfer to specific relatives as part of an estate and moving it down. Maybe it would go for 5 generations. I think it's okay. We've got cabins and things that do that now. That's part of the tradition in Estes Park. So I think some kind of limited allowed to transfer to specific relatives or heirs, as opposed to selling to somebody. I wouldn't support that. And then the natural persons.
I think I'd agree with Frank on that. But a question for you is, I hate to ask this, but how many are we thinking between 2021 and now for that?
Jackie ran a spreadsheet on that, and I think it's, we only have 20 some odd, 22, I believe, licensees that fall into the category from 2021. So, and I think about half of them are licensed as a business association, like an LLC.
Half of them. Okay. Yeah, what Frank just kind of recapped, that's exactly where I was headed, and similar to what Bill was saying here too. But I think the removing it from the family kind of like estate generational thing, that gives me heartburn. I think it's not, your point is great, Frank, that it's kind of a cultural piece of what the Estes Park experience has been like for families that have owned cabins here for years and years. And also it's for some people, a huge component of their estate and what they're leaving to their families. And I think to potentially strip that is tricky, but I think it would have to be as part of like an estate transfer versus I'm just going to give it to my second cousin, because I don't want to like give up the license to, you know what I mean? It's got to be something that I feel like fits within that.
And just one more little quick comment about that comment. I get what y'all are saying, but I seem to remember the numbers when we started looking at vacation rental numbers. They weren't elevated until like 20 years ago. So we're not talking about generations of short-term rentals. We're just not. So when we I get that thought process, but I don't think that's the majority of vacation rentals are for generations. I think that wasn't a thing until rather recently.
The only other thing to mention there is I think we should allow one-time transfer from an LLC to natural persons or whatever they have. We shouldn't change this and now all of a sudden they lose their license because they happen to put it in a trust. Yeah. Give them an opportunity to give it to a natural person. As long as their natural person convert it.
They need to be required to do that, though, at the time of renewal. They need to take it out of that LLC and put it in. Definitely, don't.
That's not a transfer.
No. They have to have the same address or whatever, but yeah, no, I agree.
And that's what I was getting at with the transitional provisions. If we do go that road, that's how I imagine it would work. you give them a deadline to move it into an individual's name.
And just quickly, Bunny astutely let me know that the way in which a lot of these are licensed is due to the fact that we now require them to apply as they are shown on Larimer County assessors. So if they purchase the home through an LLC, they have to apply so that we can go on to Larimer County and confirm that they are the owner. So if it was Sunrise LLC, they need to apply as Sunrise LLC. So it's just a little other tweak that we might have to make and an adjustment of how we determine whether or not they own the property or not when we're making some of these adjustments. So I just wanted to let you know that.
And it's a good point because these are business licenses, and I believe our overarching requirement for business licenses is that they be held by the owner. So this would be a divergence from that.
I've heard kind of a general drift in certain directions. Is that sufficient information you've gathered?
Let me see if I caught the drift.
Yeah.
So natural persons, whether one or two, it wouldn't be as crucial because we are talking now about allowing this to be passed to a family member. I'm not hearing that it needs to be upon death that it's passed to a family member, although we didn't really get into that. Allow it to be passed to a specific set of family members. We could start talking about that, or we could just take a crack at what that list would look like, bring it back to you all for further conversation.
I'm sure that was consensus.
Okay.
So I support what you've said so far, which will lend a little bit more weight to, I think, what I've heard from Kirby and Frank.
That's fine. I just wanted
On,
consensus.
yeah, and I haven't weighed in fully, but I do like the opportunity for a family to maintain a property as part of that estate or as part of that, what they're leaving behind. So I support what you've said so far.
Yeah, it does. He was just saying consensus and I wasn't seeing it, but I'm seeing that as a 4.
No, I'm sorry if I said that. I don't
say
mean to say there
consensus.
was a consensus, yeah.
You were just going with the
Summarizing.
flow, and there you go. And I'll affirm the same. So there, now you have a super majority consensus. So, okay, continue. Were there any other components?
I don't think so. I think that we can take that general direction for the next step.
Yeah,
Bring that back to you all. We can all take shots at whatever list of family members we come up with, because I'm sure it won't be the right list. But we'll take a crack at it and come back and chat.
yeah, good. Some of the trustees who've had a lot of history with this get into the flow a little bit better. A couple of us who still are getting acquainted with some of these pieces. It's definitional, but we're getting there. We're coming up to the bar.
May I, Mayor? I know we're getting close to time on this, but could I put either of you on the spot to talk about, the thought process at that time and why you would be resistant to family, out of total curiosity, that transferability being so kind of black and white? And you can say no. I mean, we can talk about it later, but I'm curious about where your thought is on that.
Yeah, I can. Go ahead.
I'm interested in your perspective.
Yeah, my perspective is this, is that I think you just have to draw the line somewhere where it's transferred. Do I have somebody that is as close to blood relative as a blood relative? Sure. You know what I mean? Are there some blood relatives that aren't even close and not even interested in Estes Park? Sure. They're going to be an heiress to, or an heir to the thing. I just think that is a black and white about transferring. That's up to black and white. If you transfer it, it should go to, open up to the pool. If the new person wants to reapply, they can reapply. And I get the whole nostalgic thought of transferring for families and it's generational, but this isn't generational. That was my point. This has just started in the last, when I first started on the board, we weren't really even talking about short-term rentals. It was either hotels or not. So short-term rentals is a relatively soon. Now, granted, I know people rented cabins. I do get that, but there wasn't like, VRBOs and all that kind of thing. And so we're not talking about this tradition that's handed down for generations, which makes it sound like nostalgic, but I don't look at it that way. I look at maybe that in 50 years I do. Right now, I'm not thinking it's very nostalgic. I'm thinking it's more of a new thing. And to me, the transferability does not open up to other people, and all it does is increase the value of that house once again. So that's my thought process. I'm not really so against it that I'm against it, but I just look at it as being cut and dry. It's transferred, and it should open up to somebody else doing it and not just increase the value of that house over and over and over again. And I don't see the nostalgic in that sense. I see more nostalgic in ADUs, honestly, in Estes Park than I do short-term rentals. So.
Yeah, I'll echo that. It's not that you're not allowing that house to go to family. That's the piece of it that could be nostalgic. It's not the renting it by the month or the night or whatever that is like, oh my gosh, now we can't do that. No, they still have the home. And then we also felt it was, they're in a residential area, let the license go and let them, again, get on the list and let opportunity for others to have a license and also to change the area in which those residential nightly rentals are instead of always in the same place. So I thought it was pretty, cut and dry back when we were on the board. I think we all really felt that we would have made these non-transferable as well. But they had those so long, and we didn't feel it was fair for us to change the way we were doing it and also make it retroactive to them. So that's why we said, moving forward, any new licenses are non-transferable. Otherwise, they would have all been. But you just have to, you have to do it as best you can. So that's where, and I still am not in favor of transferability. I mean, I have one, and if my kids want to have the rental, then they can get in line if I don't fall in that category. So it doesn't mean that the house goes away. They still have that house, just that piece of it. Anyway, that's
And not being fair to I don't know if that was really the term that majority of the board felt at the time, like taking away the transferability, but not to be fair to the people who already had it. I think it was more like we were advised not to, honestly. Just like Bill said, it could, and I'll say this publicly, we probably shouldn't, but it could be a problem. Anything can be a problem when you change something that's already been going on, anything. So I think at that time we were trying to make it that things were not going to be transferable, but to be fair and to be advised not to, we didn't make them transferable, the new ones, for that reason.
That's helpful. No, and thanks for the extra time, Mayor, to talk about that. I think the nostalgia piece too, I just want to clarify. It's not necessarily that we want to hold on to the nostalgia of renting the house. It's if for people who might have purchased this or, have had this house, applied for the license, waited for it, gotten it, and now the affordability of the house is related to the rental license. And if something happens and it's passed on within the family and now the house is no longer, maybe they had the house for a while and then they just recently made it into a rental, it makes it affordable. It's those kinds of factors. It's not necessarily the nostalgia as a concept. It's thinking about people who may have considered their personal financial planning and estate as a factor, or this being a factor of that. I think that's where my brain is going right now. Not nostalgia of, it stayed in the family. I mean, that is great, but more so, what are we potentially impacting for people who are, that's part of their livelihood or what they're handing it on. But I think it's really helpful to hear the background. Thanks for sharing that.
I think one other thing you mentioned the transferable licenses are worth more than the others. This would eliminate that if it only can be transferred to a family member. That I think eliminates that financial market advantage in any way, because the reason it goes up is because you can sell it to somebody else at a higher price. Well, all you're going to do is give it to a family member. They can't sell it to anybody else. It doesn't change the value or rise that at all. So that it takes that concern off the table completely.
right. Are we there?
Yes.
Okay, thanks to both of you and to the trustees. Future study session items, trustees and town administrator.
Mayor, I have one. I was approached by a business person in town who started sharing. Jamie from Brownfields approached me, and they are number crunchers over there, and they watch trends and they watch data. They're very sharp, watching the direction Estes Park has come from and in the direction it's going to. She started telling me about this view that they've had and this opportunity that they see. And I had to stop her because she's a great speaker. I said, could you write that down so I can share? And she said, no, it's probably better if I share it in person. I think because she wants the opportunity to interact. And she's a great speaker. I said that I would ask if it was reasonable that this board would hear her for 10 or 15 minutes about this. And I said, can you maybe just write down a description of what this is you want to talk about? Because after listening to you for a few minutes, I couldn't describe this. I get the concept, but I asked her to tell me what it was. So she sent this. And before I tell you this, have you ever heard of the Stockdale paradox? So I like to say, oh, the Stockdale, I have no idea what that was. So a Stockdale paradox is from an author, Jim Collins. It's maintaining faith in a positive outcome while simultaneously confronting the harsh realities of a situation. So understanding what that means, this is what she wrote. Drawing on the Stockdale paradox from Jim Collins' book, we believe it's essential to maintain hope for Estes Park's thriving future while honestly confronting today's challenges. She would appreciate the opportunity to share their observations and offer insights that may guide thoughtful, forward-looking discussions for our tourist-based economy. So I want to advocate for it because they are great business people. They are persistently optimistic and see the sunny side. And I think that it might be refreshing and really timely for us to entertain her at a study session, if you are willing, to extend an invitation for them to address us. And I told her she could have 3 minutes, any meeting she wants to come to. And that doesn't really provide a way that we can talk and have a conversation about it.
It's a pretty general statement as is. Almost metaphysical, but.
Well, I think that they look, and I want to share their perspective with you because it is so often encouraging in business that they look at a holistic perspective of the whole picture. They don't look at one thing that irritates them or one thing they celebrate. And I think that it would be encouraging for me and this board and our community to hear what is a business perspective on the challenges we have today and how we can push through that. There's a little connection, I think, to the type of visitor that is coming to Estes Park today compared to 5 years ago or so. It has shifted.
Will she put together a presentation that we'd have a chance to see coming
I
into
didn't
the
nail her
studies?
down on any of that,
Yeah.
other than, can you present this to the board and give us an opportunity to ask you about it? So she's willing to bring something. I'm sure that she would meet any challenge you put before her.
Other thoughts?
So I'd like to ask if we can have time on a very near study session to do this. We are asking the community right now for input on a tourism master plan, on what the future is for tourism at Estes Park. This is very timely, and it's not somebody coming in to complain. It's somebody coming in to encourage. So I hope that would give us maybe a push. That's my sales pitch to bring her in.
That was exactly my question. Do you think, and I've met with Jamie recently and we've had a great conversation. She's got a lot of great insights. Do you think, it sounds like it might be more appropriate, at least for this first step, to go before the Visit Estes Park Board, which if we're talking tourism master plan, we're talking about, or are the business challenges related to municipal services? I think that's where, absolutely. We always want to make sure our community members are heard. I'm just curious if this would be the most appropriate forum for that.
I had the same thought. And is this the right place to go? I think that the perspective they have is these are community decisions that we are making that shape the future of our community, the services we provide, the experience we provide, not how we market people here. We don't, it's not our thing. We are making decisions about what Estes Park is. And I think that that is the focus. That's the opportunity.
Would other businesses want the same opportunity?
Anyone could ask, right?
I like your idea. You know, anyone can ask. I don't think this is a matter of, we're going to have a flurry of people wanting to do this, but, you know, if we do, we'll deal with it then.
I don't think, I'm so sorry. I don't think she's selling, and I don't want to like, we have to, we can absolutely not. She can come and do 3-minute increments. I don't think she's trying to sell anything. I think she's trying to come and be encouraging to us as leaders in the community about decisions that we make. It felt timely for me because I think we have some real challenges here coming up and some things we have to do, but I will say no more.
I think, I'm fine with it. I think it'd be great. I'm a big Jim Collins fan. And I think an opportunity for any of our businesses that are looking at the kind of things he talks about in Good to Great and looking at the community from that big perspective. And I do like it before the town board because frankly, we get a bigger audience than anywhere else does. It's a good message to send to the rest of the community too to hear as well. So I'm fine with it.
I'm for it. I'm usually not, and do not take this in any insult, dog and pony shows. I think this is not one. I think it's encouraging, and I think in this day and age, I think it's good to have something encouraging, and I think it's good to have something that's across all political boundaries. I think that's really good. So
It sounds to me like that's 4 trustees who like the idea. Let's get it scheduled. Any other items to bring forth, Travis?
Mayor, we would like to get a development code update study session, an intensive one on the August 12th
Yep.
study
that's
session
about the
for
good time.
90 minutes. It'll
'Cause
likely
we
take,
just did one at the end of May, right? Yeah.
what's that?
We just did one at the end of May, so that'd be about quarterly. That'd be right. Good. Okay. With that being said, we will adjourn and return at 7 for the board meeting.